recorded on New Year's Day. The story name is The Thin Gray Line. Story from Baku no Hero Academia. I'm reading it from Wattpad. The story person I'm reading it from is story_collector. The original person who created it is at a_toast to the outcasts. They created it on archiveofourown. Now, I'm gonna click. Like, the beauty of the Earl of Quirks wasn't the amazing abilities, it was that nobody would, even sane, would even entertain the thought that Kuroko, the most wanted vigilante in all of Japan, was quirkless. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Everybody started packing their things, eager to leave and go home. A young teen remained in his seat, curly green hair blocking his face from view as he furiously scribbled in his journal. If you asked anyone in his class, they'd say that Midoriya Izuku was a freak, a kid with delusions of heroism, and somebody that you shouldn't talk to, out of fear of what the resident class bully would do to you if he thought that a Deku like Midoriya actually had friends. Midoriya was so involved in his writing that he never noticed the door to the classroom opening, or the three figures stepping in. He'd just finished catching up on his notes on Mountain Lady when a hand slammed heavily into his desk, startling him and making him drop his pencil. The sound of the piece of wood clattering to the floor was blocked out by the guffaw, G-U-F-F-A-W-S, of the two lackeys behind a rather terrifying blonde boy whose teeth were bared in a smile. So Deku, the blonde drawled menacingly, looking down at him. Heard that you wanted to apply to UA, huh? Midoriya started to fidget with his hands nervously, trying to avoid eye contact. Yes, I was, Kachan, he managed to squeak out. The first lackey nudged the other. Hear that, man? He said. The little nerd still calls Bakugo Kachan. As the lackeys laughed, Midoriya leaned down to grab his pencil, making certain that he didn't make eye contact with the volatile blonde. He jolted when Bakugo's sneer smashed his pencil to splinters, falling out of his chair in surprise. Listen here, you quirkless trash, Bakugo hissed, grinding the remains of the pencil into his foot as he took a step forward. UA is the place where the best of the best are made, so naturally I'm going to be the first one from this shitty school that's going to get in. And I don't need a fucking Deku like you getting in my way and fucking that up. He wiped his hand around the lackeys, glaring holes in both of them. And you two can shut the hell up. Midoriya scrambled backwards, desperate to avoid the other male's advancing form, not entirely sure that Bakugo wouldn't just step on him if he was underfoot. I'm not trying to get in your way, Kachan. His back was now against the wall as he could feel sweat slide down the back of his neck. I just thought that there wouldn't be any harm in trying, right? No harm? Bakugo asked as he bared his teeth in a snarl. Midoriya shrunk in on himself as a foot slammed right next to his head. No harm? You probably haven't gotten this through your fucking head, dumbass. You're fucking quirkless. You know what that means, right? He didn't even wait for Midoriya to respond. It means you're trash, lower than trash. The only thing you'll ever be useful is as a punching bag. You fucking shit stain. Bakugo removed his foot from the wall as he walked over to Midoriya's desk. And just what the fuck is this? He spat menacingly, holding up the hero journal. Still on Mountain Lady's page, Midoriya leaped up. That's mine, Kachan. Please give it back. He reached his hand for the notebook only to recoil his hand from the heat of a small explosion. He watched in horror as Bakugo carelessly dropped the notebook, charred pages falling apart on impact with the floor, scattered amongst the pencil splinters. A journal on quirks? What use would that be for? The blonde snorted, turning and starting to walk away. He looked over his shoulder. Here's some advice. You want a quirk? Leap off the roof and pray you'll have one in your next life. He let out a cruel laugh, his two henchmen joining in before leaving the class, the door slamming shut with a tone of finality. Midoriya stood in the exact same spot, watching at the remains of his journal. When he finally moved to pick up whatever was left, his paper crumbled to ash underneath his feather-like touch. He didn't know exactly what he was feeling as he stared at the ashes of his journal he had worked so hard on. It was like pain, yet not. His chest felt like it was hollow. Was that normal? He didn't know or care. He took a deep breath, then sighed, scooping up the remains of his journal. Didn't want to upset the janitors. Broken shards of his pencil were picked up as well, and both were thrown into the trash bin as he walked by his way out the door. Walking down the familiar tunnel that led home, he hoped that the day wouldn't end on a worse note. The day had ended on a bad note. It ended on a really worse note. He really shouldn't have changed it. The worst thing about it was that it actually started to get better before that. He'd managed to meet All Might, his personal idol since early childhood. Sure, he'd almost been suffocated by a sludge monster in the process, but that could be easily overlooked considering the fact that, oh my god, he actually got to meet All Might. He'd actually thought that things would have gotten better, but they didn't. He was standing on a rooftop with All Might right after recovering from the initial shock of seeing the man, the legend's true form. He asked his question, could someone quirkless like me become a hero? All his life he'd held on to the hope that someday, somehow, he'd become a hero. He ignored the jeers and cruel taunts and pitying looks his teacher gave him. His own mother's worried expressions as he jotted notes about heroes. But this was the straw that broke the camel's back. His idol, the man whom he'd aspired to be like all his life, thought he couldn't be a hero. The numbers from earlier was back, only 1,000,000 times worse. It felt like he was a hollow shell walking. His backpack felt unbearably heavy. Each step was a fight against gravity as he mindlessly walked home. His steps halted as the sound of a scuffle crossed the street. A crowd had already gathered, watching the fight with interest and occasional calls of encouragement to the heroes. Heroes. Izuku stopped and stared. He had almost started to run through the possible heroes at the scene, but shook his head once he realized what line of thought he'd almost went down. Watching heroes fight after what happened today? No thank you. He turned his back and continued walking until he heard explosions of an awfully familiar roar of rage. Without another thought, he turned around and ran to the scene as fast as he could. It was all over. The slime monster that had Kachan in a suffocating grip was detained by the heroes. After All Might had taken the villain down with a single punch. Normally, Midoriya would be freaking out and taking notes excitedly, but that wasn't the case this time. Main difference? The two aggravated heroes staring down at him as he was being experimented, examined by the paramedics. He tried his best to avoid their disapproving gazes and instead focused on the paramedic that was carefully wrapping a bandage on his arm. He didn't even notice that he was bleeding. That was adrenaline for you. Eventually the heroes decided to speak to him. And when they did, it was with patronizing words and reprimands. Izuku couldn't help but clench his fists as they treated him like he was a toddler made of glass. Geez, there's a limit to how rash you can be, you're a death Goro said irritably, making Izuku shrink in on himself even further than he was before. There was absolutely no reason for you to put yourself in danger, Kamini Woods continued, crossing his arms like a parent expecting an apology. Okay, no. This was not going to continue. He was not going to apologize for trying to help the closest thing he had to a friend, and wow, that said something about his social life. No way. Izuku took a deep breath and grabbed his charred backpack, which had somehow been found in the mess that was the battlefield, and stood up. He looked at the two confused pro heroes in the eye and started walking away from both of them, and Kachan, who was now glaring at him like he was an ever-persistent stain on his shoe, Company Wood stopped him from leaving by putting his hand on his shoulder. "Hey kid, where do you think you're?" Ezekiel shrugs off the hero's hand and continues walking, only to be stopped once more by Deaf Girl, who had jogged ahead and stand in front of him. "Hey, you can't leave yet. You still have to fill out the police report on the incident," the hero said gruffly. "You're a minor, so the press won't be able to interview you without your parents' permission. So that's one thing out of the way, but you can't leave until you've filled out your side of the events. No offense, sir," Izuku said, practically craning his neck to look at the easily 6-foot-tall hero in the eyes. "But you saw what I did. There's no need for me to fill the report, since they're going to take your word over mine." He smiled mockingly. "After all, I'm just the young civilian that rashly ran into the fray and needlessly put themselves in danger. Maybe it was the stress from the day or the post-adrenaline shock, but Izuku was done, and he wanted to go home." The hero frowned. "Look, I know we sound rude, but we're just concerned. That criminal had a quirk even we couldn't fight against, and you just ran up and tried to fight them." "That's the problem," Izuku interjected, letting the irritation and emotional exhaustion from the day dictate his words. "You were standing around waiting for a hero with a better quirk to handle this situation to show up. Guess what? One did show, but at the last possible moment. Meanwhile, Kachan, my classmate, was being suffocated by the slime, and you all just stood there watching as he fought for air. Calm down, kid," Kamiri tried to placate. "We weren't equipped for the situation, so we waited for backup. That's standard protocol." "Did you ever consider that attacking its eyes, the only part of its body that wasn't slime?" Izuku asked. "I threw a book bag at it, and that was that. That was enough to buy Kachan a few breaths of air. So why didn't you guys just go for its eyes? Is that part of protocol too? Claiming you can't do anything when your usual way of handling it isn't an option?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Look, I've had a very rough day. SANS, slime monster, and I really want to go home. So I'm going to have to make a bat out of hell, or are you going to let me pass?" The hero seemed at a loss for words, so Izuku simply sidestepped them and continued on his way home. Halfway to his house, he realized what he'd said to the two prominent heroes and groaned, face-palming so hard both his hands and face stung from the impact. Izuku made sure to take a more obscure path home. Not really wanting to be around people at the moment, his mind went over the day's events, starting from Kachan's cruel words and ending with the heroes trying to scold him. That's a laugh, considering all they did was stand around. Izuku paused, wondering just where that thought had come from, but hesitantly acknowledged the truth of the statement. Heroes were supposed to be positive influence on society, discouraging villainy and inspiring hope in the general population. Yet when a civilian truly needed the help, all they did was stand back because their quirk wasn't suited for the situation. Izuku was quirkless, and he still managed to buy Kachan some precious lungfuls of air with a book bag of all things. Is that really the people he wanted to be around? People that relied so heavily on their quirks to help people that they didn't know what to do when using their quirk wasn't an option? Becoming a police officer like All Might had told him wouldn't be any better. All they seemed to do was sit around and let the heroes do all the work. He honestly couldn't recall a single instance where the police had handled a villainous situation all on their own. So if couldn't be a police officer and couldn't be a hero, what could he be? All Might had finally led the reporter's office trail. Why reporters weren't considered a threat to heroes, he'd never know. He sighed as he replayed the fight in his head.